Hello, and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast where we tackle the most quote-unquote difficult films that cinema has to offer and try to figure out exactly how difficult they really are. I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today's episode is our special experimental film edition. We'll start by talking about Stan Brakhage's 1964 avant-garde touchstone Dog Star Man, and finish up with Elias Merhige's 1989 cult horror What's It? Begotten. Join us if you dare.
What's it? What is it?
I don't know. It's a What's It.
Oh my God. Art house extreme. Engage.
For sure. So, Seth, you want to introduce our very special guest for today?
Yes, I do. I've known Tim for a long time. He's one of the first people that I met in the arts and music scene around Akron, Cleveland, Ohio. I don't know what, are you the director of Rubicon Cinema?
Yeah, sure. It's just two of us who run it.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks, Marc and Seth, for inviting me on your program. Rubicon is it's a small screening series that we've been doing in Highland Square since 2016. We have a lot of filmmakers come through town. A lot of them you might peg as experimental filmmakers, but we really show all sorts of different stuff, different types of nonfiction, animation. It's really just kind of a party. It's a really great way to just celebrate cinema. We have a nice little crowd. It's free and open to the public. We haven't done it for 2 years now due to the pandemic. So it's something that we hope to get started again. But again, thank you for inviting me on. I'm happy to talk about both these films.
I'd like to ask a little bit more about your introduction sort of to experimental film, because I know a lot, like the first time I saw like a real actual film strip version of a Stan Brakhage movie, who did Dog Star Man, the first movie we're talking about today, that was at Rubicon Cinema. I forget which one it was. But I know you got that and a few other films distributed to your film series through, was it Canyon Cinema? That is like sort of under his umbrella. Stan Brakhage was at least a part of that in Colorado or something.
I think that we got those from the New York Filmmakers Co-op.
Oh, okay.
Which is funny because he is part of this New York filmmakers scene, and he helped start Anthology Film Archives, but he's mostly associated with Colorado. Canyon Cinema that's in San Francisco, they probably also have some of his films as well.
Oh, I don't know why I thought it was Colorado. Forgive me.
How did I get watching experimental film? It's been a long time. I went to Antioch College in Southern Ohio, which is a really old liberal arts school, has a pretty radical history, and it had a very, very interesting media arts department. I think I went there because I wanted to make film or something media arts related, but I didn't really know what that was. When you're in high school and you're younger, it's easier to get exposed to maybe more experimental music. And if you're into moving image media, it's really, I feel like at a young age, I had a yearning for more, and I had professors who really were great at introducing a lot of different filmmakers, concepts, techniques. And so it really began there. And I also spent some time in college at Anthology Film Archives working there. So that's really, that's the groundwork. That's where it's all at. And Anthology Film Archives, if you don't know, is like the premier film center in the United States. It's really it was started by a lot of American avant-garde filmmakers, but they show everything, and their Essential Cinema collection is like original prints. It's like the Hall of Fame of world cinema, including a lot of experimental film. So that's really it. It's just an incredible learning experience being there. Jonas Mekas was the founder, who just passed away a few years ago, and I feel like it's become a lot more famous since then. But a lot of different personalities hanging around there. People also like Abel Ferrara, who's not really an experimental filmmaker like Stan Brakhage, but is part of the independent film movement, making radical films, doing what they want, telling interesting stories or no stories at all.
And I'm really interested.
I feel like,
I'm really interested in getting this movie and Begotten on this podcast, because there is sort of like a lot of what we've done have been unwatchable movies for reasons of like specific content or hot button issues. And while there is like some content in Dog Star Man, Grateful Dead song, there is definitely content that is like difficult, but the big thing is,
and especially Begotten.
Begotten, yes. But with Dog Star Man, I think it's a good introduction to experimental film for people who are maybe like don't believe that they can sit through like a total. It's a silent movie. First of all, there's no sound. It's about the visuals of this movie, and it is an hour and 16 minutes or so. Like, so it's like a full length film, and it does have a narrative of sorts to it. And I don't know. I would like this episode to be sort of a challenge to viewers who are maybe intimidated by experimental films to give it a go, kind of.
Yeah, because like you said, a lot of the other movies that we talk about are unwatchable for very different reasons. But these are films that, even adventurous moviegoers might find difficult to get through, just because, they challenge our most basic assumptions about cinematic storytelling. So, whether it's the lack of plot and characters, or even being able to tell what you're looking at most of the time.
Yes.
These are movies that use the grammar of film in ways that most of us just aren't used to. So in a way, these are maybe even films that a lot of people are even less likely to be open to, regardless of content. And so, yeah, that's why I thought this would be a great idea for an episode, because, especially I feel like I'm probably the least experienced out of you two with like purely experimental films, especially at feature length. So I really wanted to kind of, bring a blank slate to this and meet them on their own terms, and see if these are actually harder to process than some of the other stuff that we've talked about.
This is Seth's revenge episode after Marc made me watch Birth of a Nation in the last episode. Like, here we go.
That's much more difficult.
Let's go in the other direction, in a way. But yeah.
And so before we get into Stan Brakhage in particular, I at least want to give a little background of where I'm coming from, and then if you guys, have anything to add to that, I'd be really interested to hear that too. So like I said, when it comes to like purely experimental, non-narrative films, I don't have as much exposure to those, and I'm not talking about things like, Eraserhead or Mare is one that I watched recently. That's like a Giallo homage that really strips away a lot of your typical narrative elements just to get down to like style and atmosphere and texture. But those are movies with like characters and narratives in a way. When I think about something that's really avant-garde, I would think about like some early Luis Buñuel films like Un Chien Andalou. I like a lot. There's this one called Outer Space by Peter Cherkassy.
Yeah, we showed it.
Oh, yes. Did you really?
That was awesome.
I would love
So
to see
good.
that like in a theater because it's such just a sensory experience.
He has a new
Basically,
film that's amazing. I just watched it a week ago.
oh wow,
Anyways, yeah.
I got to check that out. Yeah, because I think this is the only thing I've seen by him so far. It basically takes clips from the like '80s horror movie, The Entity,
Hmm.
and abstracts it and does a whole bunch of crazy visual things to it that I found to be really cool.
It's a
Uh,
remix.
yeah, exactly. And most recently, the Taiwanese filmmaker, or no, the Thai filmmaker, Pichitong Weerasethakul. I've just learned how to say his name.
You
Good
Uh,
nailed
job.
it.
yeah, he
No,
contributed
I
a
don't
short
know.
called Night Colonies to. It's like an omnibus film that's kind of COVID themed with a lot of like shorts from different directors, which I really liked. And I mean, it's basically like 10 minutes or so of like a bunch of insects crawling around a bed with like artificial lighting on it. Um, it
Love his
definitely in
shorts. Haven't seen that
yeah.
one, but I've seen a lot of his shorts,
Oh,
and
I
they're
shouldn't
so
spoil it.
good.
But yeah, I definitely recommend that to anybody. But what all those have in common with is that they are shorts. They are very short shorts. So when you start getting to feature length, I start to lose examples, and the things that come to mind mostly are like avant-garde documentaries, where I'm thinking about like Leviathan, which I think have you seen that? Haven't you, Seth?
Yeah, intense crab movie,
Yes.
crab catcher movie.
Yeah. It's all about the like visual experience where you're not always totally sure what you're looking at, or at least not for a while. And the Grand Bazaar is another one that I watched recently, which
He
is like
also
a
showed that.
oh man, I gotta get out. We need to get this place reopened again so I could
Let's
see
get it
these
going.
in a
Jodie,
theater.
Jodie Mack is great, and her shorts are incredible.
Yeah. And so those are like feature length ones that I was totally with them the whole time. They have like a real deliberate sense of like dynamics and pacing to them. The Grand Bazaar is like basically a bunch of, there's a lot of textiles and patterns that are all edited together in wild ways that I was just found mesmerizing. So that's basically where I'm coming from with these kind of things. But I know that Seth, you've talked a lot about experimental films that I've never heard of before, and I know this is your thing in particular, Tim. So any kind of just prelude you want to say before we get specific?
About experimental films. About
Yeah. Maybe it just some kind of sensibility, maybe that you have, or is this like your favorite kind of thing to
you
get
know,
into?
right now I feel like we're in a heyday with a lot of this experimental cinema because I just think so much of the aesthetics from it are seeping into so many other more mainstream places, whether it's music videos, whether it's Twin Peaks: The Return, which has a lot of references to experimental cinema. I just feel like there's a lot of um, playing back and forth um, between this whole world of experiment. And then also you mentioned Leviathan, and that's another place where it's really happening a lot in documentary nonfiction. Um, you even have like HBO Max, who is or Disney too, who are, I mean, funding films that I think are essentially experimental films, like Get Back, um, or Exterminate All the Brutes. I don't know if you've seen that one. Um, so I think it's just an exciting time for visual media. I mean, we were all saturated in moving image even before the pandemic, but now it's on a whole new level. Um, so my interest really is, I mean, it's movies, narrative, but it's also installation, video games, music video, um, all the above.
Hell
Cool.
yeah.
Seth, did you have any?
I mean, I would just second what Tim's saying. I mean, I think there is a lot going on, even if we're talking about just like something like a lot of animated Netflix shows or Adult Swim and things like
Totally.
that. We're inundated. Like even Stan Brakhage, I think, like is, whether they've even heard of Stan Brakhage or not, I think his influence reaches, which, because like the classic stereotype of a Stan Brakhage is this sort of flutter of color and like acid flash and just like mind fuckery of like a film strip of so much of so much flying in front of your eyeballs, and it seems to be very people are just more and more interested in that sort of I don't know what the fuck sort of aspect. So I think
I have this theory. I think it's because of music. I feel like the mass culture of music has changed so much, and it's a lot more electronic, ambient based type things that I feel like people have this internal soundtrack that, 50, 75 years ago, that wasn't really a thing. But
uh,
I think it has something to do with that. Uh, People have internal worlds, that maybe they always had, but they're kind of more in touch with now. Maybe something like that.
and
Um,
speaking of internal worlds, is I think that's like a perfect segue into who Stan Brakhage is, because he is this. I mean, there's a lot to be said about who he is, but he seems to have like he's driven in such a big way. Like he's having he's often quoted. He sounds like a guy who's on more of a spiritual quest than like being a guy in Hollywood trying to make his movie or something. Like this
Definitely.
movie, I believe, comes from him venturing out into the woods. He's like is filming all this stuff with his family once he moved them into the woods of Colorado and the mountains and stuff, correct?
I learned just today that there really is a dog to the Dog Star Man. It's not just the dog that we see on screen. There's like a deeper dog involved. There's
Oh.
two dogs.
Oh man, a deeper dog.
I
There
didn't
really
see the other
is.
one.
So what I read in an interview with him is that this is partially what inspired this whole project, because Dog Star Man took a long time for him to make. I think for a long time he toured just the prelude to Dog Star Man, and then
Which is the like beginning of the universe, sort of. It's
yeah,
which it is like it's maybe the I don't know. The whole movie is very abstract as far as imagery goes. It's a lot of like such fast cutting. So like how would you like characterizing it is difficult. It's like
it has a
fast
lot
cuts
of
of
different
so much
things.
imagery, and some of it is actual painting on film, I believe. He's like
Yeah,
scratching into the actual film grain and running it in front of your eyes, along with like random footage of I think he uses, what is it, stock footage of like solar flares, and I don't know, like he got the stock footage, I forget from where, but like space footage, and then also footage of like mitochondria, like cellular stuff injected into this. um
so the films that we showed at Rubicon that Seth, I think you saw, were made right before Dog Star Man. One's called Anticipation of the Night, one's called Cat's Cradle, where it's like documentary footage of his wife giving birth. And so that's the thing with this earlier period, which he described as part neorealist, part dream vision, psychodramatical genre. That's his words for it.
He's
And
real
we
good at parties.
But
and we should
actually,
note that this is like he's doing this stuff like in the 50s and the 60s.
yeah,
That's what
Like
we have neglected to say. Yes.
yeah, like what Tim was saying about us having a little bit more of a context now, or the relationship to music that didn't exist in this form like 50 years ago. This would have been a much more innovative and thing that would be harder for a mainstream audience to process back in, I think, Window Water Baby Moving is the one that's just the birth, right?
oh, that's
Of
right,
his wife
yes,
giving
yeah,
birth, which is from 1959.
yeah.
And we're talking like, close up showing her giving birth. in a way that would have been considered, very graphic at the time and still now, really.
Well, look,
Mm-hmm.
when we showed it at Anthology at Rubicon, people left the room definitely when during that film they couldn't.
Still happening, yeah.
It
Yeah.
is intense,
And it isn't. It's insane to like most of his movies you would watch and including this one, which is 1961. It's like shot over a course of like 1961 to 1965, and the automatic adjective you would use is psychedelic. But like this is before, like in 1961 at least, is like before that word would even be like thrown out so easily. This is before the like true summer of love. This is before everyone and their mom was taking acid and stuff. And like the idea of these like scatterbrained like color inundated films was like totally novel. It's wild for me to like watch something like the prelude of Dog Star Man, which is the birth of the universe in the most psychedelic way. Like you would never even know like what year this came out. But you like if you look at like the actual date on it, you're like thinking about how like are the Beatles even out yet? Like thinking about like I Want to Hold Your Hand is like gonna come out, and like all that stuff is like that's like as wild as American culture and British culture and all that is getting really at this point. And then Stan Brakhage is out here blowing up his own brain.
Now,
While the
I
rest of
always
of America was watching the Ed Sullivan Show Beatles performance, there was some art house theater down the street where people were seeing Dog Star Man for the first time.
totally. I mean, that's how it was. He personally drove it around the country, and
Like D.W.
I
Griffith.
yeah, totally. Well, he was influenced by D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith is in the Essential Cinema Collection, Anthology Film Archives. But oh boy.
Yeah, well, before we go any further, just in case anyone who's listening isn't familiar with Dog Star Man, it's basically 5 different shorts, technically pieced together, starting with a prelude and then part 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when I say it's from 1964, 65, that's kind of like when the completed version was out there, because I think that, people might have seen this in pieces at different times, but nowadays it's pretty much all compiled together. Like Seth said, it's like about an hour, 15 minutes long or so with everything together. And I don't know. Seth, you want to give a plot summary?
I'd
for,
love to attempt a
Dog
plot
Star Man?
synopsis of Dog Star Man. So, as any good movie starts, and as both of these movies kind of start, Begotten and Dog Star Man begins at the beginning of the universe, at least according to Stan Brakhage. And we do see a bunch of footage of space and like splattered color and everything. And that's sort of the prelude. And it's very abstract, lots of like psychedelic colors flashing before your eyes. Um, and but as the film progresses, we see Stan himself is the main character. He's the man, and he has a dog. So in the first part, we've seen the star, and now we have the man and the dog. And the man and the dog are scaling this mountain, which again is like nearby his home that he was living in, which we see at a certain point. That's another part of this, that a lot of the films around this time and like throughout his filmography, they are like partially these like huge psychedelic visions and partially also him sort of documenting his own life and like sort of home videos. Like he even talks
Personal
about it.
filmmaking.
Yeah, personal filmmaking, that like quite often it's about him like documenting the birth of his daughter or his daughter's life or his wife's life and things like that, and their life out here, which I heard him moving to the woods to film a lot of this. It was viewed by some people as like, oh, it was like this Walden moment for this artist or something, where he like became in tune with nature and he was being inspired by nature. But like like I would argue that like anyone can see that is not what what the deal is here. It's like an evil Walden. Like it is a person. It is the man trying to climb up this mountain for much of the film as he's like barraged by this like sensory overload of rainbow images and sparkling colors and stuff like that, and struggle. And he allegedly kind of hated it out in the woods, that where he was living. It was like his wife's idea for him to leave the city and go live in nature and things like that. So this is like him and his dog are struggling up this mountain, which there's all sort of he says that a lot of this is supposed to be mythical, like it's supposed to have mythical undercurrents, and there's a lot of interpretations you can go to, which we will get into. But for the sake of plot synopsis, from what I've gathered, he eventually gets to the top, and there is the tree of Yggdrasil, which is a mythical Nordic tree of life or something, I think.
I must have missed that part.
Yeah, you blink and you miss it with this movie.
I saw some trees.
The tree does not have a name tag saying Yggdrasil on it, but he cuts it down, which is of course like pretty big gesture, maybe against nature or man claiming nature. He reaches the top of the mountain, and I'm pretty sure that's what the final part is.
So he called it Mythopia. That was this new style of filmmaking that began in this Dog Star period. So what I read is a story that Stan Brakhage says is I guess a good thing to point out is that he considers Jan Brakhage co-director of like all of the films, especially from part 1 Dog Star Man on.
His wife,
yeah. And
was she like the one filming him when he appears? Because someone was holding the camera.
Yeah, she must be doing some of the camera work, but then he also describes this process of him making edits, then her standing in the editing booth, making edits and going back and forth. So she was really, I think, much more involved. So they have a family dog that they love dearly, and it dies by getting hit by a car. And it's in the middle of the winter, and Jan Brakhage is against burying the dog. So they just like go find a tree and just kind of lay it underneath this tree. But he says how the tree must not have been far from like behind the house, because he would go behind his house and he would smell the dead dog, and also it's floating on the snow and ice at this point. And every single time he would go outside, he would like start sobbing. And so they make a film called Cyrus Remembered, which Cyrus I think is the name of the dog. But then they find another dog that they just call Brown Dog. And he talks this whole thing about how they never named the dog, so it's like this anonymous dog being that's kind of around. And then the dog starts like laying and rolling around and wafting. He described as perfuming itself in the other dead dogs like remains. It keeps going back to the same spot over and over again. And that's something about this is what like inspired Jan and Stan to starting in part 1 of Dog Star Man, there does become this whole more family thing that's going on. There's a baby in the film. She's in the film naked, but something about this life cycle thing that I think the way he described it is that the path of life is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which is also his sort of rationale for at least part 1 of Dog Star Man.
Yeah, and I think it's telling too that you get any 2 people to try to just describe the movie, and so much of it's talking about your own interpretation of it. It's almost like impossible to be like, somebody else might watch this and be like, creation myth. I don't know. I remember there being a baby, and there's definitely a guy, going up a hill. Um, but so much of it depends on, what you bring to it. And part of that is just extra textual knowledge, like what Stan Brakhage said about it in the background, where it comes from. And it's interesting to consider, watching it, knowing those kind of things, and then watching it just in a vacuum of this abstract imagery for so long,
And I
that,
think,
it's hard to pin down.
oh yeah, and I think that can be intimidating for audiences. That when people talk about how it's about you bringing things to it and you doing some work for it, but at the same time, I think people should find that, like I at least, my big thing that helped me finally break out and get into more like quote unquote like difficult experimental, whether it be literature or film. I think the big thing was me realizing that is very freeing, that there is so many interpretations and there's so many layers to, for instance, Dog Star Man, which is, there's like a mythical layer of knowing, like you can find all this allegory if you look for it, and there's also this layer if you were to research Stan Brakhage's life, about how it is allegorical and biographical of the artist himself. And there's also the next layer, which is, I think, the most important layer, which is you sitting as an audience member and what you bring to it, because it is such like quite often like so abstract that it's almost a blank canvas. So some people might watch a film like Dog Star Man, which is this, it's there again, there's no audio, it is all image based. So a lot of it is, you can probably, some people would watch it and find it frightening or stressful or anxiety producing, and I think then another person can sit down and watch it and find it cathartic and even like touching or something like that. And I think that's what's kind of exciting. It's freeing.
I think
Yeah,
it's
and
important to try to watch it in at least certain environments. Um, you're going to have a different experience watching it if you're in a dark room watching it on film. But also, with Stan Brakhage now, he's pretty accessible. Like you can go to the library and they have brand new Blu-ray copies of Criterion releases. They have 3 volumes Criterion has put out.
Library plug.
Yeah. So I would just encourage you, if you do try to watch it in the highest quality you can, because you're going to have a different experience with it.
Definitely. Since a lot of these abstract and experimental films are so much about being an experience, I think that those kind of things are really important to it. That if you're not, if you just have it on in the background, you're playing with your phone, or, the casual kind of way you might throw on, a Netflix TV show or something, you're going to miss a big part of how it was meant to envelop you, and the specific kind of, visceral response that you could have. Because I think a visceral response is the main kind of one you have to movies like this. And I do want to talk a little just about specifically what he does technically, because Seth mentioned that he would paint directly onto the film strips, do all kinds of other things to distress them, and really, use different exposures, really rapidly cut between all of these images so that, certain parts play almost like animation. There's like some really distinct like snowflakes and stuff that sometimes pop up that you see. And, there's time-lapse photography in there. And I almost feel like there's something lost today because it's too easy to accomplish that now. It's like there's Instagram filters that can replicate, stuff that we see in this movie. And
even just slow motion, just drop the slow motion effect on. He's doing slow motion in his little like shop, editing shop in the woods, like in the 60s. Like, it's just wild.
It's real interesting. You can find an audio recording that's a conversation with him and Pauline Kael.
Ooh.
And it's kind of funny because like Pauline Kael hates the movies. She does not like it. He's a pretty good champ about it. Like he doesn't let up either. He's really like, this is about like mythology. This is about the world. It's okay if you don't like it, you know. But why did I bring it up? What were we just talking about?
We were just talking about the process that he goes through to make the films.
That's it. Yeah. So she starts talking about technique, and he is like really against the idea of technique. And he starts talking about how a lot of these films are like family films, and how some of the footage, even like his kids took, he doesn't even know who took all of it. He just uses, he's so into this idea of the unobstructed eye, you know, I think that if he could, if you could give him a concussion, wake him up and give him a camera, that'd be like the best, you know, because and he, at the same time as Dog Star Man, he wrote a book called Metaphors of Vision, which is really, I think, was a magazine issue of a famous magazine journal called Film Journal, where he goes into this whole philosophy of like, he's talking about the subconscious. I mean, that's really what he's obsessed with, right? He's obsessed with the subconscious. He's obsessed with mythology. He is seeing himself acting out this myth life all the time. In another interview I read with him recently, he talks about this mythology that he felt like he was a part of, where he ended up almost subconsciously killing himself. and that this also like fed a lot of like, it's this period. Because I think Dog Star Man, there is a lot of depression also in these stories. I mean, when you talk to him, or not talk to him, when you listen to him, he has a lot of life, he deep knowledge, deep soul, but he really brings up a lot about how this well of creativity comes from a lot of like deep depression.
That makes sense, because I think the main motif that you can latch onto in this movie is this him, trudging endlessly up this hill and, hitting trees and it seems not totally sure if he has like a specific destination or if he ever gets there, but, it's hard not to think of like a, Sisyphus type character just, going on and on and on and onwards. If there's like one thing to focus in on this movie, I guess that was what stuck out to me.
Yeah, it's struggle. It's something. Yeah, it's just being overwhelmed. Which the watching of the movie is also an overwhelming experience, which I think helps with that. It helps you feel whatever it is this mythical person is feeling, sort of. I read about Stan Brakhage's movies, and I think what helped it make sense to me, especially this time around, was how it's very bizarre for us to watch movies that don't have sound or dialogue, but it's while there is such thing as a music video, it is still, it's very widely accepted for us to sit down and just listen to a record, right? Or listen to a song without any visual content. And that is what's so, because like oftentimes like people will want to throw on a soundtrack for this movie, or like wonder why, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was like some experimental soundtrack going on with this movie? But I think what's going on here is like it's the uh it's the film equivalent of music, of like, this is how music is just raw audio experience. This is raw visual experience, and like uninterrupted, in an uninterrupted way.
I think that at the time there was this really big interest in not using music amongst these filmmakers, which I do kind of agree. If you turn off the sound, you can see better. I always think my favorite
Hmm.
experiment to do with this is actually with commercials. You put them on mute. I feel like you can see the commercial a lot better. And I think that there's some idea like that with all of these filmmakers at this time, because really most of them are all doing things with no sound. I do think that part of it is just a technological limitation at the time that maybe they would totally think differently of now, you know?
That's interesting, especially going back to process, because yeah, that is like a whole other deal. Like him doing this film with just like his wife to help him, like having audio equipment, like as much as like what I just said is true about this, there is also that just like practical element of it. It's just like if he wanted audio or like that would be a whole other deal. He would need another part of the crew and things like that. So it is something that sets him free with just like now he only needs the camera. He just needs a camera, which is 8mm. He's using 8mm for this. There's a lot I don't know about the technical aspect of what's going on here, which
I
is
remember
just like,
reading he
yeah,
switched to 8mm at some point, but he might have still been doing this one on 16.
okay.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
not positive. You know, though, over time he used everything. He was like a early uh artist using IMAX.
Weird. I wondered if he would be if he made the switch to digital ever, because that seemed like what he was actually like wanting to do with actual like concrete film, right? Like he wanted to just like be always filming. It seemed in a way that we can do now with our phones, right? It feels very much
Totally.
like he just wanted to document and create and throw on whatever like again like use an Instagram as an example like filter he wanted at any point and like I imagine his mind would just be blown by digital stuff.
It'd be very interesting to know if he made any digital stuff. I mean, he died in '99, so I think a
Yeah,
lot of the commercial technology wasn't really there yet.
because
Um,
like in this method of making movies, like when you talk about a cut, like I still think there's like we don't really comprehend like what it meant to make a cut in a movie, and especially in a movie like this, which like you could it's countless the amount of like per minute like cuts that are just like strobing at you and things like that. There's like so much work in a very artisan arts and crafts sort of way that must go into something like this.
yeah, and
if
I kept getting the feeling that the lack of audio, especially learning that a lot of his other films didn't have audio, is just more like that was just not a part that he concerned himself with that much because he was so focused on the visual stuff. Whereas, maybe had the resources or the time been different, maybe there would have been some audio. Um, so I do wonder how intentional or like a deliberate part of that was in terms of it being an ethos that he was following, and how much was just like you know creating a soundtrack to a movie like this would be such a big undertaking and would so shape how you processed it. Like that would have been a whole other like equal amount of work. And I think that's going to be what, if anyone finds this to be unwatchable, that just the dissonance of being in complete silence for so long is going to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people. And it was for me, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
because the first time I watched this, I made sure that I did it exactly as it was intended. I watched it alone, so I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't like play with my phone, and I just sat there in silence. And honestly, around like the 45-minute mark, I needed to take a break. And I think a big part of that was the sound, not contextualizing anything, so that all I had were these images. And it did start to get a little wearying um, to me after a while.
Yeah, you
And
have no
I
idea how
yeah.
much time has passed. Like in a different
Yes.
way. Like you could tell me that we were at like 15 minutes in or we were like 2 hours in, and I don't even mean that in like a bad way. It's just like I felt so placeless while watching a movie like this because yeah, like not only is it just so unorthodox in a film narrative level. Like it's also unorthodox just like sitting in a room silently for a long time like that.
And I had to make sure that I wrote down like the exact timestamp where it was when I paused it. 'Cause I was like, if I lose my spot, I will not have any idea where to find myself again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are the chapters. You can go back to
right. It was
That's
in the middle of part 1. So, but it was like, I didn't know if part 1 still had 30 minutes left or 2 minutes left. Like, you know.
Yeah, the prelude, I think, is the longest part. And again, like that was the part he took on tour. I mean, you know, it is a brutal film. It really smacks you in the face. I think every single time I've seen it, I had different reactions to it. I mean, I bet the first time I watched it, I wonder if I did get all the way through it. I mean, I've seen it on film now, and I've seen it since then. I mean, honestly, we just watched it last week, and it was maybe the best time I've seen it. You know, like I saw it just so clearly.
It's because I was there,
right?
You know,
It could have been and it's also the Blu-ray. I think it is a good introduction, though, to if you're interested in exploring that world. You know, really, the unwatchable Stan Brakhage is the act of seeing with one's own eyes.
Which is interesting because that is like a key influence on our next movie that we're talking about, Begotten, apparently.
Yeah, I just read that.
Which,
oh god, so it gets even worse then.
It gets
wilder.
Even
pick the most unwatchable.
Oh yeah, it's. I mean, Dog Star Man is. I wouldn't consider unwatchable. I mean, I think it's a more difficult film, and if you're not interested in that, you know, type of cinema, maybe it's not something you'll like. But as far as films go, the act of seeing with one's own eyes is very graphic, very well. So it's all shot in a Pittsburgh morgue, and so it's just footage.
Oh, that's the autopsy one?
The autopsy.
I read about that.
Yeah.
That's gross.
Yeah.
Follow-up episode.
It is gross.
We'll pair it with Faces of Death and then quit.
Yeah.
The podcast.
Yeah, going back a little bit to the sound thing, I did the next day then I did want to watch this with a soundtrack just so I could kind of, you know, see what the difference was like. And, you know, I kept thinking like, all right, what's the kind of thing that should go under this? So I was going back and forth between like, oh, a Can album might be cool under here.
Ooh.
Especially one that has like, you know, like 20 minutes of just kind of like noises and sounds and stuff going on. I thought about like one of the late like talk albums, like Laughing Stock, maybe something that was like a little freeform, jazzier,
sure,
ambient.
I'm sure some post-rock band has projected this movie on top of themselves.
I was gonna say I'm pretty sure that people have definitely used Stan Brakhage stuff for projection work, especially at like, I mean, I think even in like raves and stuff. Maybe not Dog Star Man, but some of the more.
It makes sense.
You know,
it's trippy, man. It's trippy, man.
Yeah, that's how I picture this. And I ended up going with Swans, The Seer.
Oh, hell yeah. Marc had a big old rave in his living room. Wow.
Oh, I did. I had the volume
Depression rave.
And I got through the whole thing in one sitting, too. So it made it infinitely more palatable just because there's this whole other layer of seeing how things match up. And now you have the contrast between more in a, you know, really insane part of this song that's high intensity. And sometimes it kind of matches up with the images. And then sometimes it brings something new to them because I'm seeing something calmer. As far as at least being palatable, I think that was a big thing to it.
Let me chime in briefly here about making Dog Star Man more palatable.
I love this.
I intended to watch this as it was, you know, meant to be seen. And I
the fool.
Yeah. I thought that I was actually going to be equipped for this because you know, Marc mentioned kind of having less exposure to experimental film, like maybe than than Seth and Tim, and I have, I think, even less than that. But one experimental film that I really like and have seen a bunch of times is this short from the early 40s called Meshes of the Afternoon, also made by a husband and wife
Maya
couple.
Deren. It's great.
Oh
Yeah. And
different type of thing, but
very. But there is no soundtrack. It is silent. However, the big caveat to that is Meshes of the Afternoon is only 14 minutes long. So just a few minutes into totally silent Dog Star Man, I realized, and this was partially my fault because I decided to double feature these, and Begotten really took a lot of the energy out of me that I think I needed to give Dog Star Man my full attention. So I decided, knowing that Marc had listened to the Swans album and then seeing on Letterboxd a lot of people giving suggestions for albums they put on with this. Somebody listened to The Money Store by Death Grips, which is an awesome album. But I decided I wanted to do this. And my only real criteria was I wanted... Yeah, there you go. That would have worked great. My only criteria was I wanted an album that would start and end with the movie, so that had the exact same runtime. So I went into my library looking for a 78-minute album, and it turned out I found one right at the very top of the list alphabetically, which was ABBA Gold.
I was going to say, was it ABBA?
The greatest hits album. And that was pretty wild. There were
Sounds
some
like
times...
Tony is the only one who did it right. Wow.
The most insane moment was probably in a Gimme Gimme Gimme, which opens with that awesome like just that like pumping bass and that synth line, and then right when the drop hits and the vocals come in, these big like loud ass choir vocals, was right when the prelude ended, and it went to like cut to part one, and it just like the moment the Dog Star Man title card appeared, it was like the drop hit, and that was pretty cool. And
give
then of course,
give me your Dog Star Man after midnight.
Yeah, there you go. And then at the end, of course, he's chopping the tree down to Waterloo, and it fades out over that. So it's up to Marc and Seth and Tim ultimately to make recommendations about what movies our listeners should or shouldn't consider watching. But I'll jump in here to say you should listen to ABBA Gold.
I'm going to do that as soon as we're done here tonight.
I'm so glad. I think there are curmudgeon-y film scholars that would be like, you're doing it wrong. But and there's, I am so glad you guys actually brought that up, because I think that's a big part of experimental media, is approaching it in the way that you can actually, that it will help you actually get it down. Because you can always build on that. And I think a lot of people get so intimidated by the stuff that I'm a person who I think Pynchon is way above my mental capabilities, but I love Thomas Pynchon. I love reading his stuff, and I just go into it, and I admit that I am not going to get all of this. I'm going to go into this looking for what I want to find in it, or what I can handle with this. And if I can't figure something out, maybe I'll listen to the audio book or something, or I'll if I just really am put off by some chapter, I'll fucking skip it or something. There is, but we shouldn't be so immediately defeated by these things, because there is, I think, even though we might be intimidated by these things, there is promise, and I think we can all admit there's stuff to be gained out of sort of weathering this stuff. And if you got to put on ABBA to do it, it's probably a great ass time.
Yeah, I think the only thing I mean by trying to do it the right way, watch it the right way, is just to make sure you have a good quality of it. Whether it's a blue, whatever the best way you can do to watch it. And then, because, what you do then is entirely up to you, I think there's people have probably been playing music to some of these things for a long time. And you do, it's an open media, really, right? I think the only reason why it's important to have a good quality is because then you're kind of meeting the artist halfway then, because at least then you are seeing what it is that they're trying to show. But then again, on the other side, like get drunk, have sex, fall asleep, whatever can happen while you're watching these films, I think are totally appropriate.
Oh man, fucking the dog star, man.
This is a sexy, sexy movie. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess in the end, I do want to say, like, if I want to try to treat this relative to other films, going back to watching it the way that it originally came out without the sound and everything, I definitely didn't get as much out of this or enjoy it as much as something like Leviathan or The Grand Bazaar. And part of that really was just that I do consider sound to be something that is really intrinsic to the medium of film, where, like I see what you're saying, Seth, about how music fundamentally is just an oral, AURAL medium that doesn't have a visual component unless you add it, and it totally stands on its own. But with film, I do think that even in the silent era, those films were always meant to be played with music, and whether
Not
it's
really,
music or
though.
not, well, I guess that's up for debate. But
I think, yeah. I mean, but even just in the past, I mean, I think that people actually maybe were more attuned to seeing silent films without always having music, because you would have had to have had a live accompaniment, and people would go into movie houses, all sorts of things. It wasn't a soundtrack.
Right. But I guess I would just say that there was a reason that they would expect, like, oh, we have an organ player who's coming in to accompany this or something.
On average, yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that obviously, you can do whatever you want with film, but that is something that I think is a little more fundamental to the medium as far as what it can do. Like I'm thinking, like, one of my favorite films from like the early sound era, like the early 30s, is M by Fritz Lang. And there were parts of that movie where, he didn't want to have to be confined to somewhere where he had mics picking up stuff. And there's certain like crowd scenes and stuff where he's just like, just leave the audio out completely. Like no background noise, nothing. Like it just goes dead silent. And I always find myself like jarred by those parts in a way that I don't think is what the movie meant to do. It's like it almost took me out of it as opposed to make me focus on it more. But again, that's something, with a movie like this, you can always put sound on, if you need it. And the other thing I think is just that, there's some movies that I think you can argue are meant to be shorts and some that are meant to be features. And the duration of this did make it kind of lose effect for me a bit as it went on. And, again, this is all just really personal taste stuff, I think. But I think that it did start to get almost repetitive in a way that, I don't know, maybe it's just that the different shorts weren't necessarily, they were made independently. And even though they re-show, and deal with a lot of the same things, I didn't really get necessarily that sense of like variety or pacing the way I did in other feature length, like avant-garde movies. And this is just me trying to break down, like, why didn't I, why was I having a harder time with this than with other similar things? And I think that the length there's something to be said about that.
Well, I
don't
think
know,
there's
maybe
a
you guys have
distinction
thoughts.
to be made between what's challenging and what is impactful,
Mhm.
I mean, just because something is more difficult, maybe you don't watch it all the way through the first time. Maybe you don't like whatever it is to get something, but that doesn't, maybe it is something that you don't understand, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
you have to be comfortable with the unknown. I mean, like he definitely is making a film that is, he's using repetitious techniques. It is more about image painting. Um, I mean, personally though, I think if you're inclined to try out other types of cinema, a Dog Star Man is a good place to start, honestly. I mean, because the entire point is for it to not be packaged into something that you can just easily consume. I mean, like, I just doesn't seem like a lot of really great art or anything that stands the test of time really is quite like that. Um, I don't know.
I'm definitely feeling what Marc is saying. That I like, again, I think we're just at this point going around and saying how we felt about the film. But I would second what Marc is saying about it. The repetition is what's so difficult about it, and even like that's the thing about experimental stuff. Like, even if there is like intent and a reason for it being difficult, it still doesn't distract from the fact that it is, it's difficult. It's hard to sit through, and like, I don't know. I mean, it like my rating system, I would say, is like both quality and also like enjoyment, and that winds up being like sort of a toss up for audience members, right? Of like, this was both rewarding and also punishing in a certain way and repellent in other ways. um because of, yeah, and the big thing was the repetitious nature. At the same time, there is something about it being like feature length that I'm so used to, like experimental movies being shorts, that they are so contained. It was interesting to see it in like a quote unquote narrative length, what we accept like sort of arbitrarily as like the narrative length of movies, which is around 90 minutes, which I found was kind of interesting about this, that it is like, and it even does like have a through line that is apparently like basically an adventure story. It does not go down like that. It feels, it's obviously very difficult, but like on paper, it is like a guy goes on an adventure to do something, which is cut down this tree. But yeah,
You should write the novelization of this.
I really should. It would
Yeah.
be, there'd be a talking dog in it, and yeah, the dog would have a lot more lines. That's all. That's all I will say.
But yeah, I do see, the influence from just this style, because I know that I've read some things that refer to like the opening credits of Seven being inspired by this. Anytime you
Oh,
see that kind of like, intentionally damaged and jagged, looking kind of style. Or, I mean, just look at any like Nine Inch Nails music video, from back in the day, where I kind of see them, using the kind of aesthetic qualities of this, for different ends. And there's a lot of really beautiful, imagery, a lot of which in this is just him messing with the film. That is really striking looking.
I think the repetition nature is supposed to lull you into it, right? Like, it's supposed to variations over and over again, changing though. I mean, there are repetitious techniques, but the movie's constantly flowing. It's like an endless river of, and it's incredible all the techniques he does in it, all the way up and through the end of it. It can be just exhausting watching so much. I mean, I
mm-hmm.
think that that's totally true. It can make your eyes hurt. And for and there's not, of course, it's not a narrative film, so there's no hook, right? That's not really the thing of it.
Right.
I saw him once talk about in an interview, say how he tries to create images on screen that he would want to lay in, which I always thought was kind of a funny idea, but I totally can kind of see it. Even though the image is flowing past your eyes on this screen, some of them seem really scary, but then at the same time, all of them are really beautiful. Really, I could imagine being a tiny person being in that world. I think that's what he's constantly trying to get at for himself.
Yeah, because there are those parts that look like, I don't know, like some kind of pulsating like innards or something, like some sort of, it looks like the inside of a body with like some sort of like organs that are like, moving. And the way that he does decontextualize this and throw it in there so that you're not even totally sure exactly what you're looking at can make some things that are gross seem more, beautiful, or vice versa, really, just depending how they juxtapose everything. Did anyone else think that Brakhage in this, the guy that we see trudging up the hill with the dog, looks like the Counting Crows guy? I can't remember his name, sorry, but
Mr. Jones is the name of the dog.
Okay. That was just the first thing I thought.
Man, does that mean we're reaching the end of the Dog Star Man discussion if we're talking about Counting Crows?
That's always the sign. But yeah, you guys have any final thoughts? And it seems like a silly question to ask now. We like to ask, if you could, would you unwatch this movie? And I certainly don't think that would apply in this case, unless, you're just somebody who I don't know, maybe got too bored or something. But I was glad to have gone through the experience, and I really did try to, humble myself before it and meet it on its own terms.
Yeah, it's exciting to see someone's unbridled inner vision like this. It was a window, if anything, it's a window into another human being's psyche in a way, and their preoccupations, and that's what's exciting about it. I get how someone might want their time back, that this is just such a difficult sit through for certain people, and for understandable reasons, that we're just, especially now, it's just really hard to sit still with something like this. But yeah, I enjoy it on a certain level. Not every day of the week, but yes.
Totally. I think if you're inclined, it's definitely something worth checking out. Or if you get the chance to see it somewhere, you should totally take it. And not you may not like it either. But I do think a lot of people will. And there's a lot more to explore too. That's the thing. I mean, really, Dog Star Man's just kind of tip of the iceberg with Stan Brakhage. Like I was saying, Criterion now is 3 volumes. It's part 1, but then part 2 is 2 full discs of work of his, all the way up until he died, all the way through the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough ABBA music out there to score his whole catalog, probably.
They just came out with a new one, so.
Yeah, exactly. We got a new one. They're keeping up. All right. Well, that takes us then up a few decades to 1989, or maybe 1990, depending on when you actually want to pinpoint the release date of a kind of similar, but in many ways very different experimental work, which is called Begotten, which I think falls a little more firmly into the horror sphere of things. And I definitely have some thoughts about as far as, this. I don't want to compare these movies too much, but there is kind of a creation myth thing going on here. There is a lot of abstraction, and these are both movies that a lot of people, if they stumbled upon them in a theater, would be like, I'm getting the hell out of here.
They both have those hook prologues for sure. That if you did just isolate like Brakhage did the prelude to Dog Star Man, it would be something that any hippie would just put on and love. And the prelude creation myth aspect of Begotten would scare the hippies away, but the punks would absolutely just have a lovely time with the first 10-15 minutes of Begotten, because it's insane what you're watching. It feels like some kind of horror art film, snuff film. It feels like an arty snuff film that is also somehow theological.
Totally. I think that there's a lot of you could see a lot of influence of different experimental films. But what I love about it, it's kind of the opposite in medium wise, like what I was saying with Dog Star Man. I mean, I feel like you gotta see Dog Star Man with certain quality level, but Begotten has got this unique thing. It's like a black metal tape, right? Like you can just watch it on any grade, and it's still, you're gonna get this like scariness that comes from it. I mean, that's why, I mean, it's on YouTube. I'm guessing that's probably how we all watched it.
It's apparently like the best way to see it like right now because it's very much out of print, difficult to come by. But yeah, that's a big aspect of Begotten, that it is, and we'll get to it more later, but it's very degraded. It's like went through a whole post-production process of making it. A lot of the thing about it is like you're trying to figure out what you're even looking at, because it's been like, it's like the film has been ironed or something. It's like there's no grays. It's like almost all harsh black and white. And sometimes the speed is being played with, and you're sometimes staring at like a horrible thing, but you're not sure why it's horrible, or maybe it's beautiful. I'm not sure. I don't know what they're doing to each other. It might not be good, but maybe it is, which is often in question. But maybe we should get to a better introduction as to like what it even is. Should I do, where do, like, oftentimes with experimental ones I'm always confused as like, should I start with a plot synopsis? Because boy, the plot synopsis for
There is a little bit more of a plot to Begotten.
yes.
Yeah, this is a little easier to describe.
It's also super fun to say the plot synopsis.
Yeah, well, you did. You did your best to kind of describe Dogman Star. So I thought maybe the best way to summarize this is just to literally tell you everything you see, because I don't think it would take you that long.
No.
To just go through it. So, stylistically, you guys have already described how, it seems like film reels that were found buried in a cave somewhere, that you project by candlelight somehow. And so it doesn't matter how, bad it looks. But yeah, let me get my notes here just so I can make sure I don't
Marc's
miss
gonna do it.
anything
Marc's
here.
gonna do the synopsis to Begotten.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of funny just to literally say what you see. So, Begotten opens in a little cabin, and there's some kind of person sitting in a chair wearing what kind of looks like a Leatherface type like mask to me. And they're vomiting up blood, disemboweling himself basically until he dies. And from underneath him then emerges a woman with a little like mask on, like masquerade mask kind of thing. She then proceeds to give this figure, I guess, a hand job, for lack of a better word, and then impregnate herself with the semen of this figure, becomes pregnant. I think kind of somehow gives birth is what's intended to, and everyone, correct me if you have any different takes on this, to some sort of full-grown, almost rotting looking, constantly convulsing, like bald figure.
You're doing great.
Which then a bunch of cloaked figures show up, start dragging it away, beating it. I think they start taking its organs out and disemboweling it at some point along their journey. The woman also takes part in some of that, and then she also is stripped, beaten, and mutilated by these cloaked, ritualistic looking figures. I think that she is sexually assaulted. They certainly pay a lot of attention to mutilating the genitals, it kind of looked like, unless I got that wrong.
They do that for sure.
So they do that to her. There's kind of these robed guys. They're doing something with them, just in the muck and mashing things together. The convulsing bald guy, is kind of put into a bag and beaten. There's a lot of imagery of like flowing water in a stream. And at some point, I think kind of plant life starts sprouting. We see kind of a body and face in the ground. And then the end.
Yay!
So sorry for that awful
good job.
plot description. But that's kind of what you see, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah. I mean,
Sure.
once again, it's similar to Dog Star Man, and like what I said as far as it taking place on multiple levels of interpretation. which there is the brass tacks version, which you're talking about, which I think is very, as much as there's so much intent and so much metaphor and mythology put into this movie, on the flip side, this director would, I imagine, be very happy with this sort of more earthy, very nihilistic sort of synopsis of it, which, you know, like maybe it's partially a joke and partially not a joke on your synopsis, but it is like part of the thing is what you're watching is just supposed to be viscera, like stimuli being cast at the viewer, which is quite often, like, as much as you can like wax poetic about it, which I'm sure we're about to do, there is just the realness of it, which is like horrors and disemboweling, and there being just cruel acts being enacted on various characters, and we are just sort of witness to it. We're voyeurs to it. Quite often the camera is voyeuristic. Even at the beginning of the film, it sort of feels like the camera is like handheld and slowly walking through the woods and happens upon a shack in the woods, and that's where we see the person who is in disemboweling himself, who is apparently God. Which,
yeah, let me say this real quick, because just before we get too deep into it, just because if you're looking at this movie literally and just seeing these figures doing this stuff and being mutilated and everything, it's not until the credits pop up at the end. And I have to admit, like, I laughed like really hard when
it's
all
fucking,
of a sudden the
it's
credits
so funny.
pop up and it goes like, this guy as God killing himself, this person as Mother Earth, and this person as Son of Earth, flesh on bone. And I was like, oh, name. So that's what I just saw. Okay.
That's who those people are.
Thanks, credits. That was God killing himself.
Yes.
So much for the ambiguity. But sorry, I've talked enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were you going to say, Tim?
Oh, no, I this is the first time I'd seen it. You know, Begotten is one of those movies, though, that I've known about forever.
It has a big reputation as far as like gross out culture. Like, it is notorious on lists of disturbing movies.
And you know, it's that poster from like the 90s. I mean, I video stores must have had it, you know, and I've just known about this movie for forever. It is kind of a good double feature for Dog Star Man in a way.
Yeah, I was surprised, pleasantly surprised.
There are similar certain
just that they fit together. That's all.
Yeah.
It would be hard to double watch them, though, to double feature them.
Which Tony did. What the fuck, Tony? Amazing.
Yeah. And
well,
honestly,
you can argue that I didn't do that successfully since I was listening to ABBA by the end of the experience.
Did you listen to ABBA during Begotten?
No, Ed Sheeran is what I listened to Begotten.
Oh, okay, cool.
Begotten could be kind of cool with some certain soundtracks, so I could see that totally.
Let's be clear, though. This movie does have sound and sound design and everything.
And it's a big part of it.
And that's a big part of it. Yeah, totally.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way. Yet again, there's no way there hasn't been like a million black metal, doom metal bands that have like. There's so many of them have projected this on themselves. Definitely. I haven't seen one, but there's like it seems like low hanging fruit. You got to do it.
I thought it was interesting looking through some of the old posters. I started noticing that they had quotes from Susan Sontag on them. And then even
I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, she's a big champion. She was a big champion of this movie, I guess.
Really interesting, and how she like had screenings of it in her apartment.
And everybody was like, thanks, Susan. Oh, maybe come over again someday.
Well, her big quote, which is on the cover of the now out of print DVD, is one of the 10 most important films of modern times, Susan Sontag.
That's hardcore.
And yeah, I mean, great. I'm glad you love this, Susan. Uh, but yeah,
Susan's a freak.
I was really surprised just reading about, first of all, that the director who made this, who it seems like came from like experimental theater, and at one point was considering making this, like this originated as something he wanted to be like a theater piece, or and which I'm just like, I wonder how that would have gone.
Yeah, definitely.
And Elias Merhige, or Merhige, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say this guy's name.
Michel Haneke.
But what I was surprised was that he directed a few like studio films, including in 2000, The Shadow of the Vampire, which has like, was it John Malkovich?
Willem Dafoe as
Willem
Nosferatu.
Dafoe.
Yeah,
like a real ass movie. And apparently just one other that I've never seen called Suspect Zero, which is like this chintzy looking like serial killer cop thriller with Carrie-Anne Moss and Aaron Eckhart.
And then everything else is experimental.
Yeah, I think after
Marilyn
that
Manson videos,
he got out.
music videos.
And Marilyn Manson
he did
videos.
Yeah.
Makes total sense. If that gives anyone any context to this, yeah, like it kind of feels like a Marilyn Manson music video with no Marilyn Manson music and no Marilyn Manson, thank God.
Yeah, and I guess it's all because of Begotten that, Susan Sontag was bringing it to people's attention. I think it was Nicolas Cage whose production company did Shadow of the Vampire, and was the guy who was like, oh, let's look into this interesting Begotten guy. And then of course you could see Marilyn Manson, sitting in his like sex dungeon watching this and being like, oh, this is what my rad music videos should look like.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And but watching this movie, it's like I wasn't totally sure if this was made by someone who didn't have like any idea what they were doing and just degraded the footage enough that it just becomes like this artifact, or apparently, by all accounts, there was a whole bunch of intention and craft that went into it.
Yeah, in a very intense way. Apparently the filming was really intensive. I read about it. It was a team up partially with Theater of Material, which I did not research all that far into, but I know a lot of its inspiration seems to come from like the like Japanese theater. It did remind me of like what little I know about No theater and things like that, which are less about dialogue, less about actual performance, and more about like gesture, suggestion. Like a lot of these characters move in like a strange, like inscrutable theatrical sort of way. Like even when they're like there's like most of the movie is the great beating of the Son of Man character, flesh on bone, the son of like Mother Nature, and even that, like there's certain gestures where you're like not sure like what they're even doing. Like it's like they were apparently in these meditative states. They did a lot of these like ritualistic like breath exercises. They said, the quote is from the director, that we breathe to the point of hysteria, which whatever that means. They did, but they were apparently in a sort of meditative state, which they were in like they were in a
how
weird
else can you
headspace.
give God's corpse a hand job? I mean, you have to be there.
Exactly, you just gotta be in that mindset. But yeah, I guess that was a big part of it.
I was reading how Stan Brakhage was also like obsessed with No theater during the time he was making Dog Star Man, which makes sense.
And David Bowie was Ziggy Stardust. It was just a wave,
For sure. And this does have a very significant sound design, that there's a lot of this kind of Eraserhead-esque like industrial hum at certain parts. There's a lot of like crickets. Sometimes there's like a heartbeat. and some of these like inhuman, like guttural sounds. And there is a like eerie, like really minimal score that emerges.
Yeah, like organ.
Yeah, with like these really distant, like martial drums, even. And I do think that's a big part of this movie. Like I think it plays better like this than it would have, you know, without any sound. Just as far as enveloping you in the atmosphere.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the sound works for this one, definitely. I think the visualness is less strong just because of its black and white, more degradedness of it, and the soundtrack really fills in some of those gaps.
Yeah, there's a lot you can read into the way sound is used here. There's an obvious indifference and alienating quality that happens when you're witnessing acts of violence that don't have some sort of suggestive theme music behind it, of like telling me that it's tragic or telling me that it's like this is a good thing or a bad thing they are doing. What we're actually hearing is like almost like, yeah, quite often it's just literal crickets, like the which is just very much pointing towards, for me, like sort of the indifference of nature to violence or to humanity, which, I mean, this gets into, and your mileage may vary on interpretation, but a lot of this gets into, for me, which a sort of mythological place of when they talk about how it is God killing himself at the beginning. It seems, which, you know, he's disemboweling himself for whatever reason. God has lost hope, and he's leaving his, whether maybe it's his creation, maybe it's not, maybe it's more of an older, more pagan outlook on gods, which gods are more like aliens, where they arrived at the place, and the earth has been here even before they were here. But that's neither here nor there. What it really points to is this sort of very Nietzsche, Michael Haneke sort of perspective that God has forsaken us from the get-go, that like he is dead, and the Mother Nature character who sprouts out and uses what's left of God to create the Son of Man, this writhing character who very clearly is just like he looks like he's like burnt. He looks like just being alive is pain. He's twitching the entire movie. She brings him into this world, and he is sort of made to struggle through it. This is definitely a dark uh, perspective on life to me. This person is given life, and it seems like it was a bad idea, because where they are cast into is just, they are passed to these roaming marauders who pick up and torture this poor defenseless person for most of the movie. It represents, I think, a lot of like the tedium of life. You're just being passed around from thing to thing, and you're not in control. You're this sort of like, he's sort of this almost prenatal character who can't influence and control anything. It's really intense to witness.
I was getting strong Tetsuo, the Iron Man vibes. You guys ever see that
Oh,
movie?
yes.
Maybe just the gritty black and white like quality of it.
An obsessiveness with bodies. Yeah.
Yeah, and the grossness of it.
Yeah, because God like shits when he kills himself too. There's of course like a long shot of just shit falling down God's leg at the beginning of this movie. It's very body centric, and yeah.
There's lots of lingering on the gore, the you know the sexual attacking aspect of it. Um, you know, lots of stuff that you might see in like one of those video nasty like horror movies, you know, where they kind of, the whole point is to just really rub your face in this stuff that you don't normally see, or with that being like the primary focus above all else, since, you know, everything else is so abstract. So this does kind of straddle genre in a bit, that it, you know, it's definitely closest to horror, but it's certainly not like a conventional horror movie. It really
That's a
is
good
more
point.
like an avant-garde.
It's like it's
type
stripped
thing.
away all of sort of like how we were talking about Freddy Got Fingered seems like closer to the nerve of what a lot of comedies want to do, or irreverent comedies want to do, which is just like going for the jugular and doing the most ridiculous thing you can, and like to hell with the plot kind of. This one is sort of like, okay, like let's just, rather than having to set up like love interests for and like Camp Crystal Lake, why don't we just have like Jason and people and horrible things that Jason Voorhees does to these people, and we witness them, and that's what happens. There's no silly guy in the background making jokes and whatnot, right?
I'd be very interested in knowing more about how the film was originally promoted. Because what I understand too is that like Susan Sontag was handed the film from somebody she knew who worked at one of the European festivals, and so it would be. I mean, like, did she think it was a horror movie? You know, I mean, I kind of think that maybe she thought. I don't know either. I'm totally speculating, but I kind of think that maybe she saw it closer to something like an early Buñuel type of surreal
Mm.
film, something
I feel
kind of
like
in
she
that
must have,
tradition.
you know, to call it one of the 10 most important films, you know, of modern times. It must have been reading into to that, you know, as more than just
Yeah,
a horror movie. And you know, I wonder how people would respond to this, seeing it from that perspective, as opposed to if this was just at your, like, you know, video store in the late 90s, early 2000s, in the horror section with one of those big giant like VHS boxes. It's like Begotten,
but that's
and
what's so
that.
awesome about it, right? Like that's what's
Mhm.
awesome about the Stan Brakhage films too. Like these things are just permeating out there. Like you can go to any library in whatever corner of the United States and find like a Stan Brakhage box set, or maybe it probably Begotten probably used to be a little bit more accessible when there were VHS stores everywhere, you know. Well, now I guess you know it's on YouTube, so that's infinitely more
Yeah,
accessible.
apparently
But
there was only he was really against having a VHS release,
um,
and for because he wanted it to be more of a thing that was seen, which speaks to his intention. He wanted to see it as more of a museum piece that was
mm,
seen as an art film and things like that. And of course, like at that time, I think people were still just kind of wrapping their heads around like VHS and stuff. But there was a fleet of there was a VHS run of this, and I think a proper DVD run, but it is now like out of print and pretty much for the most part untrustworthy, as far as like what you're getting at might just be a YouTube riff of the thing that you can just watch on YouTube. It
With a
is
death
not
metal
very readily
soundtrack underneath
available.
it.
Yeah, with the black metal soundtrack.
boy, I
Yeah.
think watching it on film in a theater would be a really different experience, actually. Or I was wondering what it would be like digitally remastered. Like, I feel like it might look kind of different.
I gotta wonder. I mean, that's always the question with this is like, since we don't have a definitive version of it that is readily available, the question is always, and there is so much that went into the post production of it. He said, it took another like I think like a year or 2 years of like post production and getting this strange look out of the film that was intended to make it look like it's not a pastiche like how Guy Madden, for instance, makes films look like they're from the 20s or the turn of the century or something. He like is quoted as saying like he wanted it to sound like it was from like the first film. It was like a Dead Sea Scroll of film, like from like the time of Christ or something
Trash
like
humpers.
that. So it is really interesting. Like I would be curious. I don't know when the last time like he just brought the reel and showed it to anyone was, but that would be like mind blowing to see it for real. Maybe it would just all of a sudden be in color, and he would be like, "Oh yeah, I don't know what you guys have been watching this whole time, but yeah, it's in color, and also it's really happy, and there's a soundtrack that is really bumping."
Apparently, like he built his own optical printer to like process the footage like a frame at a time to like distress it and give it that super high contrast, overexposed, like grainy look. And like when I was saying earlier that I was wondering if you just saw this cold and wondering if this was actually made by, you know, a skilled filmmaker or somebody who just ran a bunch of, you know, footage through these effects and showed gross stuff. That I know there were certain times where I was like, oh, it looks like this is actually like something visually interesting going on here. And then other times where I was like, I don't know if the footage wasn't so heavily processed like this. If they just snapped it all into focus, this might look more like, you know, blood-sucking freaks or just some low-budget like gore fest. Which, you know, that's just, you can't really separate what we got from, you know, how it started. But I don't know. The Wikipedia page for this is almost suspiciously epic and thorough. Like
Yes.
it has like every bit of minutia, and you know it's talking about Buñuel and David Lynch and
People are obsessive about this.
Yeah, and you know I'm a little hesitant to give it that much credit personally. I mean, just, you know, with the way I described the movie, you know, that is just like the literal things that you see. And then afterwards, it kind of informs you that, you know, this was God killing himself. And it's interesting to like talk about it and, you know, about what it's doing and how it's approaching these things. The actual act of sitting through it, I, you know, found this, you know, often disturbing and stuff, but not really illuminating in the sense of any of these actual ideas. And maybe that's just because the approach is just so narrow-minded, and you know it's just gonna literally show you all of these things happening. But I don't know, it was harder for me actually watching it than thinking about it afterwards, as far as like I almost get more out of it having a discussion like this. But is there really something, any kind of way that actually watching this, I don't know, stimulates those thoughts or engages you in it? I'm not so sure.
Well,
I feel like
what thoughts are you? What thoughts specifically? Like its themes, or
Right, you know, about this being the creation myth, and you know, stuff that, you know, even you brought up about the you know, the soundtrack remaining kind of still while we're seeing violent, you know, things happen. It's like, all right, I can see how this is subverting kind of cycle of rebirth, birth, creation myth thing in a weird way, but I'm really just literally seeing a bunch of like gross atrocities happen for a long time. And is this really the way to does it deserve credit for that stuff, when sitting through it's actually a pretty simple act of just seeing gross stuff? I don't know.
well, I guess I don't. Well, I guess what I'm really engaged with is the fear. I mean, maybe it is because I am in the internet age watching it. You will, like, more than likely look up the Wikipedia page before you, like, I know I did, or like you hear about it from someone. Whereas, yeah, like watching it cold in the 90s or without looking it up on the internet, it is this sort of perplexing, like, I think still exciting, because it is sort of like this feeling you're watching a cult, like a literal cult home video that I accidentally happened upon, and like, should I turn this into the police or something? Like, it really feels like a ritualistic murder on film or something. But beyond that, I do think I almost see it as more of a fantasy film, like something closer to a fantasy film than a horror movie, as much as it is about atrocity. The mythological aspect does stimulate me in a particular way, that it is this exciting god-centric, these are primordial characters in a strange landscape that might be ancient. It also, like, they filmed it in a construction site, which, like, sometimes you can almost like laugh when you see like tire tread, but at the same time, like, my imagination goes to like, this could also just be this timeless, like, horrible barren earth, maybe even post-apocalyptic or something. But I don't want to go too much into like just like, oh, far-flung theories about Begotten. I do think the real exciting part of watching the film is literally watching it, which is this sort of appreciation of how the images and what they mean to you, and what they first look like when they hit your eye and what they slowly dissolve into is like the real thing. It's like there's sort of a passage of time that goes by where you're staring at something and you're not sure what it is, and it slowly dawns on you what it is, as it like, and then it moves and it becomes more inscrutable because of how degraded the film is. It's hard to track like whether this is a shadow or this is an actual person. um and I find that aspect of it to be what's exciting. And again, there is, and I think the theme is very apparent throughout it. Even if it is just like strikes you as like, I want to turn this off, I think it is successful in that it's showing you the indifference of nature and the antagonism of nature, the chaos of being in life, while it still does have like a weird hopeful kind of ending almost.
Definitely
Even
does.
though it ends with, spoiler, they, at least from what I can see, they mush the Son of Man, flesh on the bone, whatever you want to call him. I think it's like his innards that, like, after just mutilating and destroying him, and maybe his mom too, like, they take like intestines that have taken him, and they're like ritualistically mushing them into the earth. And the next scene we see is this time lapse. It might be a real time lapse of a blade of grass growing out of the ground, which again goes back to this sort of like, we are thrown into this world, we go through it, and there's maybe not much meaning to be gathered, and we go back to the earth, and the earth is still here, and the earth perpetuates after we're gone. uh, I don't think that's too far flung of a theory to place on there, but that's enough rambling from me.
You're
Tim,
totally
any
right.
thoughts?
Everything. I went through phases of impressions while watching it. Sometimes I was totally in deep with the images on the screen, and then sometimes there'd be this monotony where you'd be like, "Oh, like, what are we doing here? What is even
Oh,
going
let
on?"
me say
And
that I
then
agree. It's
sometimes,
monotonous. It's monotonous
which is
sometimes.
fine,
Absolutely.
and then sometimes it'd be like ultra gross, right? It'd be just like, this is body horror to the extreme. And it was kind of like a cycle of it. And then by the ending, it becomes this sort of beautiful ending. Um, I think that trying to decipher the genre and all of it, I think it's maybe kind of meaningless.
I agree.
There's been a lot of crossover since the beginning with horror film and just the outer reaches experimental film type of stuff. It really makes a lot of sense for them to kind of feed off of each other. Um, I just keep thinking about this whole thing about the film feels like like something you found in the trash or something like that, like that cult feeling of it, and how there's not a lot of other examples of that now, because everything's just so accessible, supposedly. I mean, the only thing, it kind of reminds me of Trash Humpers. I think I kind of yelled that earlier.
I was gonna say, yeah, Harmony Korine's Trash Humpers.
Definitely, just actually in theme, more than anything.
But yeah, it's
and
designed to be like this video cassette that you found on the ground, and then you put it in, and it's just like a bunch of people doing like stupid pranks and sadistic pranks and stuff.
So
Yeah,
I think that their ambitions, both of them, are much larger than that. I mean, with Begotten, the ambition is closer to like Dog Star Man, right? This is like about the cosmos and the universe and God killing himself, where like Trash Humpers, I don't know what Trash Humpers is really is about.
that's for another podcast.
The ambition is more of an extreme anarchy, right? It's like the negation of what's right or whatever. It's the negation of society, and so in that way they're similar.
It's almost like performance art, really, like that. The existence of the thing itself is part of it. And you're totally right about how the time this came out in the late 80s, early 90s is very much linked to its mystique, because this was a much rarer kind of cult object that would be going around that wouldn't be easy to find, and you don't know how you would stumble across it. And you may see it and watch the whole thing and have no idea what it was or where, any kind of extra textual stuff that you could add to it afterwards. So I think that is a big part of it there. If this got posted for the very first time today, like on YouTube, you could probably find 100 other things like it with people using like weird effects to make something look, uncanny and disturbing. And, but yeah, it's maybe just I probably wouldn't I haven't seen Trash Humpers. I really doubt that it would be my kind of thing. Either way, and maybe it goes to the being feature length thing, but something like this that's so blatantly like symbolic all the way through, I don't tend to respond a lot to any kind of film that is chiefly operating on this symbolic level and not on another level. Like, there's room for metaphors and symbols and all of that kind of stuff, but the movie has to work on its own, completely independent of that stuff, also, for it to really feel like full to me. And so something like this, where the whole thing is, we're taking a step by step through the mapped out God killing himself, then this, then rebirth, and that's the only level that it operates on. It makes me think it's not actually as interesting as it is, again, to just talk about. But again, this is just where I come from for, as far as approaching films, and that they have to kind of work on multiple levels if you're going to go that route, as opposed to it just being this thing that you can map out and study. And the act of, I'm not, all those themes, that Seth brought up too, that are definitely there. I've seen movies that have similar themes like that I think were communicated much more effectively or productively than in something that is so blatant or literal in this way. Like the actual act of sitting through it isn't as illuminating as making the connections in your mind.
I guess for me, like it's 100% just physical, emotional. Like I guess when I was watching it, I didn't really. I feel like all the symbolism is totally secondary. It's totally like that's not the real main thing that's going on with this film. It's like that these guys were able to create such an aura,
And I think it's experiential is like the word. Like the experiencing of the movie, as much as there is, again, like a lot of this stuff, there's like a lot of layers that if you want, you can go in and research a ton and find all the mythological stuff. But at the same time, if you just go in blind, I think there is something, and it might be just a gross thing that you want to turn off, but it still is like, yeah, it's an experience for sure. It's a visceral experience.
Totally. And I really actually agreed with that whole about the performance art aspect of it. That was definitely something I was picking up on too. It felt very similar to some of these actionist performance art, or Kurt Kren, if you've ever heard of him. He's kind of a well-known Austrian experimental filmmaker who would make kind of gross movies. They really kind of do have this similar thing going on. But they're not horror films, they're kind of more, I don't even know where someone like Kurt Kren was showing his films, and that's like from the 50s.
Yeah, and as far as the experiential part of it, I don't know. It's like kind of one of those movies where I feel like you can take any 5 minutes at any point and get the gist of it. So it does accomplish this memorable imagery and atmosphere and everything that would absolutely come across in any like 5 minute stretch. And I'm not sure what it really accomplishes by stretching that out over feature length, that there needs to be a more to it than that if it's going to go on that long. But again, that's something you could even say about Dog Star Man, which is that you could take, any little segment of it, and get the idea, since it's not about following a linear path. And that just might go back to my, why something should be a short versus a feature.
Yeah. I mean,
I just think that we are applying expectations to the films that the filmmakers are not even thinking about at all. Like I'm not exactly sure what our criterion is for an accomplished film. Some of these things that we're discussing, some of the tools we're using to discuss some of these films, I think are not really applicable. That's not really what the films are trying to be.
Which is what, like first and foremost, even beyond content, again, is like a good way of putting what deters people understandably from these films, I think, is that he, like, from a length standpoint, or like general, like, I like the idea of getting the gist, or the idea of having, like, feeling an arc, is not necessarily in these filmmakers, like, interest in, like, in the same way that most filmmakers are. And that's not giving them like a free pass. I get it, why people would veer away from this and see something else instead. But I think that is sort of what's going on here, is the intention is very different. Which
Yeah,
is, yeah, especially with something like the length of the film itself.
And I do see that, but these are movies that want, the creators want us to take them seriously and to get things out of them. And again, the, Wikipedia page is just like paragraphs of the director talking about all of the different, layers and aspects and everything of it. And so I don't know, at a certain point, you have to be able to analyze what the experience of actually watching, the whole thing is like. And, every experimental film isn't going to be the same as the next, right? You could watch 100 of them and be like, well, this one I think works and I like it, and this one doesn't. It's like, if your only criteria is just going by, the intent, it's almost like they want to have their cake and eat it too. Like, however you're experiencing it, all, that really matters is what, my intent was, and you're expecting things that I'm not trying to give you, but also I want you to engage with it, and there's deep themes, and there's got to be some sort of line there where it's working or it's not.
I think that the intent is closer to breaking people away from some of the constraints that we have all kind of just accepted is a way you make a story or a film. That's the purpose, right? And so that's the reason why some of the ways we're discussing it, that's not really what they're talking about, right? Like, we've as a society have created a very more narrow way of of engaging with moving image, whatever it is. It's mostly entertainment, right? That's that's what most people's criterion for rating things are, is how your personal fulfillment, however it is that you measure that. And that's not really what that's not the only thing. And that's not maybe even the specific thing that they're focused on. Stan Brakhage is someone who's talking about time, right? I mean, that's a big theme in these movies. It's not just the subject, but it's also the medium, so there's a reason for things to be longer.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So. And I guess, it's just the audience does have a role in the, experience of watching a movie. So, whether it's entertainment, it still is, there's other things that we get out of them, which could be any number of things, any different ways that it engages you, but it's got to do something, I guess. There's got to be something that's happening between the audience and the screen, as opposed to the movie just existing on its own, and it's totally fine if nobody is, watching it.
Well, I mean, both of these movies, clearly people got something from, right? I mean, Dog Star Man is a huge movie in like cinema history. Like, it's not, people have been programming Dog Star Man all over the world for a long time. Like,
it's just so much more
something from it.
It's just so much more subjective, like, which all art is. It's just this is where it gets even more narrow. That's stating the obvious. It's just like, yeah, your mileage may vary, and I always want to stress when it comes to this stuff, like, no shame, like, as far as where you wind up with it.
And when I'm saying applies more to Begotten than Dog Star Man, honestly, because I don't know, with Begotten, I was just getting a little more of a sense of like the Emperor's New Clothes or something. That I'm not convinced that this was worth the voluminous Wikipedia page that, for all I know, the director himself, made, since he's not doing movies anymore. And like, I don't know.
Whatever happened?
Not trying to throw shade on Brakhage, but I'll throw a little shade on this Merhige guy.
Oh, yeah, I don't know whatever happened to this guy. He made a sequel to Begotten called The Din of Celestial Birds, which is also on YouTube. It's a lot more cosmic. It's only 15 minutes long, and it's more abstract. It's just kind of like cosmic imagery. It's not really gory. But that was apparently like going to be the second in a series or trilogy or something, but we never heard from him, to my knowledge, again.
It is such a bizarre career. It looked like.
Yes.
Like what is the deal? Begotten, and then Shadow of the Vampire, Marilyn Manson music videos.
Yeah.
I was so surprised about Shadow of the Vampire.
Which is like a well put together, like kind of
totally normal film. I mean,
so if anything gives me more confidence in that there is something going on that's worthy of attention in Begotten, it was that like, okay, this guy does seem like a real filmmaker, not necessarily just like a, experimental theater guy who did this one provocation and got out.
Yeah.
And I want to see the Aaron Eckhart serial killer movie, frankly. Let's see what that Suspect Zero.
I heard it's really bad.
I'm sure there's a reason nobody has heard of it.
Yes, sure.
I probably would be better off watching Begotten again.
It's a wild ass fantasy movie, most brutal fantasy movie I've ever seen. This side of only like maybe Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 rivals it, perhaps. As far as fantasy movies go, I gotta say.
It did remind me of some early Guy Madden at certain parts.
That too.
It reminds me of another really famous experimental film called Flaming Creatures, which I'm going to assume it probably was inspired by. It's got a lot of very similar imagery. Jack Smith, also huge, really championed by Susan Sontag, so that's why I'm also feeling like there's some connection there.
Yeah. I mean, again, just like similar to Stan Brakhage, a window into someone going through some shit with art in front of you. And again, I think maybe it's me seeing what I brought to this was definitely me as an artist, and also me who, like, I feel like I've had like weird experiences, whether they be through art or even like psychedelic drugs or like meditation or something. Like they said, this was like sort of like like it was like almost like the artifact that came after the fact of the actual action of creating the film was almost like important, but also like just as important was that like this actual event that was taking place at this construction site while they were filming it. It sounded like I think he used the term of like it was like a personal myth that we all like. It was like a life changing for all of us who were involved. It was like a weird event, which of course is like hearing about somebody's dream, right? Which is a classic thing where everybody's like, okay, I get it. I've had dreams too,
Right.
but you know, like
Tell me something else that didn't happen.
I can't really get there because I wasn't there too. But I mean, the flip side is that a lot of people forget about, and I don't know, maybe I just have more like excitement and empathy for it, is like I've had that, so I am very interested in like getting a window into such like weird transcendental moments for people. That's another aspect of I see this, but we can go round and round, but like at the end of the day, it is very much like gonna float some people's boats, and not even like depending
Might
on the
sink
day,
some boat.
sink some boats.
Titanic. Yeah.
Absolutely, I get it.
Begotten, it's gross too. You know,
It's
it
fucking
really
gross. They're like
it's
pulling out
gross.
his innards
You
and
can't
making him
help it.
eat it.
Yeah, it's disgusting. So yeah, but would you unwatch this is the question. I'll say, there's not a lot of movies that we talk about in this podcast where I'm like, yeah, I wish I could unwatch this. Because ultimately once the experience is over, it's like, usually you can at least file it away somewhere. But keeping that in mind, I would still probably put this in that category. I wasn't a big fan of Begotten. It was interesting to finally see it after knowing about it for so many years, but I want to give Dog Star Man the edge here.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I would not unwatch it. I'm actually looking forward to watching it again
You sicko.
years from now, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
But like I don't know. There's something about it that is very mysterious to me, and I don't know, especially late at night sometimes where I just want something like bizarre, nightmare inducing. Poof, there it is.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't unwatch it. And I don't want to pin the two movies against each other either. Because though I was pleasantly surprised by how there were a lot of similar. I don't know if it's similarities, but there are themes that were similar, I guess. Certain styles, the length.
Mm-hmm.
But similar to Dog Star Man, I do feel like it could be it's an introduction to kind of a whole new style of horror. Horror imagery, horror cinema, whatever it is. I think that's why it has such a reputation. So it's like, if you're interested in that, you should definitely check it out. I think you may not make it all the way through.
And that's fine.
Totally. Sometimes you gotta fall asleep, and then it just gives you nightmares or whatever. It haunts you.
Yeah, you'll watch the rest with your eyes closed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be a gateway drug.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Yeah.
To something else.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I definitely really want to thank Tim for joining us, because this was a lot of fun. And I think you brought a really good perspective to this. And I think that, theaters like the one that you're involved with is really important in continuing on, passing these things down, because whether it's in a film school or it's in a theater, especially when it comes to less, mainstream forms of film like this, there's really a lot to learn about it. And it depends on those kind of things to keep bringing people in and to keep it going, or else, you might end up out of print so that no one can find your movie unless it happens to be on YouTube.
Totally. Well, I mean, thank you so much for being on this program. It was a lot of fun. I don't get the chance a whole lot in the last 2 years to, we didn't get to watch them together per se, but, just to have these discussions. I mean, that's what it's all about, really, And just the other day, it was the first time I've been to a theater in like 2 years, which is kind of wild. Have you guys been going to the theater?
Not much, but only in the last couple months.
Yeah, my first time back, it was in, I think, last like December, seeing West Side Story in the theater.
Oh,
And
I
we
would
like
love
made
to see
sure
that
that
today.
we like made sure that the seats were, like all spaced out and everything, because, it had been like well over a year and a half since I'd been to a theater. And God, it was a great first thing to go back to. Just good, like old fashioned, big, carefully like choreographed movie making. And
West Side Story was awesome. I agree. I just watched it on the small screen just like a week or two ago, and I was like, those sets and everything, it's awesome. So good.
Yeah, that should be part of our experimental episode. We should have devoted some more time to West Side Story.
Tim, do you want to tell people where they can find you or more information about Rubicon Cinema online? Maybe they can keep an eye out for a future reopen date.
Yeah, right now we are mostly just hardly managing our Facebook page, but you can friend our Facebook page. You can find us on Instagram too.
All right. Any final thoughts from anyone? Anything we didn't before we shut off the airwaves? Tony will probably find a good edit point before this anyways to fade us out.
I just want to let everybody know that I am... My actor name is Seth, but I was playing God killing himself the whole time.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.